welcome to the premiere edition of The Hard Sell with me, your host, Joel Stevenson. A little bit about the show since it's our first one. The idea is that, whether or not you work as a salesperson, we all end up selling things. A lot of times we're selling ourselves, whether it's in an interview or a college application, but sometimes we're selling things like a car or even a company. And our goal is to help you win when sales opportunities present themselves by bringing leaders in the field together to share what works and what doesn't, and generally try to help you figure out things that would be really hard for you to learn on your own without the advice of some experts. So we've got a great first guest for the podcast. So really happy to welcome Eric Siu. Eric's an investor, founder, advisor to companies. He's chairman of digital agency Single Grain, and he has a couple of podcasts that are long running and very popular. Marketing School with Neil Patel, and Leveling Up, which is an entrepreneurial podcast where he dissects growth leaders, growth levers that help businesses scale. And most excitingly, and something we're going to talk about in a minute, is Eric just released his first book, Leveling Up, How to Master the Game of Life. And so, Eric, welcome to The Hard Sell.
Thanks for having me, Joel. Very excited to be the first guest.
Yeah, great. Well, like I mentioned in the green room, it's a new podcast host, new podcast platform, and a new podcast. So, what could go wrong?
I think it'll be fine.
You're going to pull us through. So why don't we talk a little bit about the book, and maybe if you could just give us kind of the thumbnail background of kind of your early career, which I think, from what I understand, informed a lot of the book and why you wrote it. So if we just give us a little bit about your history and what brought you to the book, and then let's talk a little bit about the book and how it applies to sales.
Yeah, totally. So I have a book called Leveling Up, and really the book is based on really my background playing video games, computer games growing up. So anybody that's played games such as StarCraft or Counter-Strike or anything, it's really those types of games, right? And so those experiences really helped shape how I look at the world and really shape my philosophies and how I think about things. And I decided to put together the book because I saw a big opportunity in terms of where the gaming market is currently going, right? You have over 3 billion people in the world that have played a game. And, those people they're going to be decision makers and buyers of the future. So now is probably a pretty good time to kind of attack from that angle and really just write like a personal growth book with gaming in mind. So that's why I created the book in the first place. But also, I decided to create the book because I wanted to, from kind of a marketing perspective, from like a content marketing perspective, I wanted to create a foundational content piece that really revolves around my philosophies, right? And from that book, I can start to build, other stuff on top of it.
Right. Neat. And maybe talk a little bit about, this concept. I mean, I think a lot of us have this idea of, gamers as wasting their life, or, I think China just recently instituted some rules around the amount of hours that people can play games. And there's probably some misconceptions there, but also, maybe talk about your transition from somebody that used to do a lot. I think you also used to be quite a high level poker player to getting into business, to then, trying to help other people follow a similar path.
Yeah. I mean, so one of the simplest analogies I use is if you think about, kids playing football or basketball or golf, they're going there partly because they're training, right? They're training their skills in communication. They're training their ability to work in a team. And there's a lot, they're training themselves in terms of powering through adversity as well. And you can also learn those things through games. That's how I learned how to play at a very high level, how to recruit people, how to join the best teams. And that directly relates with the world of business, with the world of selling as well. If you want to build a sales machine, you got to learn how to recruit the best closers, right? And so here's the other thing about talking about China for a second. If China just kind of banned Bitcoin mining, right? But what ends up happening is if the market wants it, if the market wants to play games, if the market wants to mine Bitcoin, the market's going to do it. And at a certain point, the governments won't be able to hold these things back, right? So I think it's actually a good signal that the government's trying to ban this stuff because it just shows the demand for it.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to put the genie back in the bottle once it starts to get out there. So maybe talking a little bit about the book specifically. So you've got a section in the book that sort of talks about, and maybe you could set up a little bit about the power ups and kind of how the book is structured. But there's a section in the book that talks about alchemy, which is sort of this idea of bringing something from nothing. And you have an analogy in that section, I believe, in sales and marketing. So maybe talk to us a little bit about that and the setup, and then I want to delve into some specifics about how that applies to sales and why that's important.
Yeah. So, I mean, the book is fundamentally based on the fact that when you go about through life, you can collect different power ups. So you can learn how to, let's say, selling would be a power up, marketing would be a power up, learning how to repeat, certain habits, right? That means like working out every day. Like these are all little power ups that you can collect. There can also be negative power ups where maybe you drink too much or you do too much drugs or you don't sleep, right? So life is really about finding these power ups and really continuing to hone these or refine these over time. And you just get stronger and stronger if you have the right habits or the right power ups in place. Now, in one of the chapters, it's titled Alchemy. And when I used to play games, there would be these alchemists, right? Or a spell that you could cast where you can kind of create things out of thin air. I believe that, marketing at the end of the day is bringing people to the point of sale, and sales is just closing them, right? And so those two kind of go hand in hand. And a lot of people make excuses about saying, oh, I'm not a marketer, or no, oh, I'm not a salesperson. But at the end of the day, we're always trying to attract to get people to do what we want. And we're always trying to close to get people to do what we want as well. So that's why it's very important to me to learn not just sales, but also marketing as well. So that's why I kind of combined the two into Alchemy.
Right. And there's sort of a long and storied history of sales and marketing teams hating each other because the sales teams will say, well, marketing, you didn't bring enough leads or you didn't bring the right leads. And then sort of the marketing side saying, well, like we brought you all the good leads and you couldn't close them. And so you're the problem. And there's, various ways that people are trying to solve that. But I wonder, with all your experience in digital agencies where you are sort of driving a bunch of lead flow to people, like what are some things that you've seen work well, like in the sense, or like, could you get a sense early on of like, hey, this is going to be a company that's going to actually deliver on these leads, or like this is a company that I have very low confidence that whatever we do for them is going to work? Or like, did you have that sense? And if so, like, what are some of the signs either in the positive or the negative direction?
Yeah. So, there's one company that comes to mind. I mean, they're a large kind of VoIP company. They do like a couple $100 million in revenue a year, and they have a sales machine. I mean, it's we work with them on a pay for performance basis, and in order to do that, that's also very risky on our side. So if we're going to run your ads for you and we take on all the risk, meaning we front all the ad spend, we're going to make sure that if we're going to partner up with you, you have your stuff down when it comes to sales. So, we visited their office. And they have this is pre-COVID. They had an entire sales floor. They had I believe they're using Ambition, so they had like a sales leaderboard and all that. And I asked about their conversion rates. I asked to look at their CRM. So everything was transparent, front and center. Numbers look good. They were willing to share that stuff, and that's what it takes. I mean, if we're going to partner up with a sales organization, they better be transparent with us. They better be honest, and then they better be hitting numbers, and they better have a sales team. So by with looking at those four attributes, those are not easy to kind of fulfill, but they managed to check all four of the boxes, and it worked out.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, it's interesting. At least in our line of work, we see a lot of different sales teams, and there does seem to be a correlation between analytical rigor and success in sales, which I think for a lot of people maybe is non-intuitive. But as things become more and more digital, we're certainly seeing that playing a big role. So turning back to the book for a moment, you've got all sorts of wisdom for folks about how they can get better at all sorts of things, and part of it is this notion of overcoming negativity, which in sales is something that every salesperson that's good is going to have a good muscle built up here, because it's sort of a game of constant rejection. And so maybe talk a little bit about some of the lessons that you've learned over time, and that you expound on in the book, about how to deal with rejection and negativity, and make a positive out of a negative.
Yeah, I mean, I love negativity. So let me tell you why, right? So it's that in itself shows you kind of how I think about it. And the reason I made that comment is because it's a reframe. And so to me, negativity or failures, those are the types of things that actually end up making me stronger. So instead of looking at it in such a negative way and letting it bring me down, which definitely, let's say in middle school or high school, like negativity or failure would bring me down, and I feel too scared to try again. But over the years, because of let's just say my Asian upbringing or whatever, you have a tiger mom bearing down on you. You kind of have to learn to say, hey, you know what can I learn from this? And is this going to make me stronger, right? So now, when there's any type of criticism at all, or there's any type of negativity, or there's any type of failure, I just know that it's going to make me stronger. And I'm looking for the lesson each time, right? So I think most people, the vast majority of people, look at negativity as a setback, and then they start to go down this downward spiral, and the negativity or the poor results just compound, and they can't recover from that, right? So I think a lot of life is about reframing things into positives, right? So that would be a perfect example of that. Like, I'll give you another example, real life. A couple years ago, I had someone tell me that they thought that was small time, right? And I actually enjoyed that, and that actually made me get a lot better, right? And I also confronted the person as well, and that person felt very apologetic, and then we actually became really good friends after that, right? So the old me would be like, screw you, like, I'm not going to talk to you, and then maybe I'll get really sad about it, maybe in like high school or something. But now it's just you just take your licking and you move on, because failure is kind of a ticket to success.
Right. Yeah. We, in at least with some of the customers that we work with, we typically would find, like, I think a decent, in a modern funnel, like from the point at which you sort of learn about a lead to when you actually close them, like a decent close rate might be, in the single digits type of range. And so if you think about, like, getting to a win means, getting said no to 95 times, and like you actually might be pretty good if you can hit those sorts of ratios. So yeah, it just goes to show that if you're focused on the downside outcome, like you probably will never get to those few massive upsides that can make your number, make your year,
I mean,
etc.
Mark Cuban says this, right? One of the investors in this app. I mean, every no brings me closer to a yes. So learn to enjoy the no's. Learn to enjoy kind of taking a licking.
Yeah, right. Something that we were chatting about a little bit earlier, which I honestly was not expecting to talk about, but I think it's a fascinating subject, and we should go there a little bit. So, there's all sorts of different. If you think about sort of the product development life cycle, where you might be selling a product that no one's ever heard of before, you might be selling a product that is very mature and it's more of a price type of thing. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the innovation side a little bit, and like things that are new, and helping people understand things that are new, because I understand that you are quite into the NFT world, which is sort of a brave new world for a lot of us. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about NFTs and what they mean, and how to think about them. And then maybe a little bit about just sort of like if you were, if you were a salesperson trying to convince somebody to invest in an NFT or buy an NFT from you or somebody else, will you just give us that talk track a little bit about what would make somebody do that?
Yeah, so NFTs stand for non-fungible tokens, and to me, the easiest way to think about them is that they are digital collectibles, and this is the first time in human history where we're actually able to prove digital scarcity, right? So if you think about the Mona Lisa is kind of the canonical example over here. So everyone's like, okay, so the Mona Lisa, why is it worth a lot of money? Well, it's because the original is scarce. It's a one of one, right? If you printed out a bunch of replicas of it, I mean, the replicas might be worth like a couple $1,000s, couple $100s, whatever. Or you could say, oh, I can just take a JPEG of it and save it, right? The point is, art is really expensive. It's because it's scarce. Real estate is expensive because it's scarce, right? So the first time in history, we can now prove digital scarcity. And so you might be thinking, okay, Eric, well, how does this apply to business? Here are a couple practical examples. And I'm actually going to an NFT conference next week in New York. And the profile picture you see in this, as of this recording, if you're in Fireside, these are the first NFTs ever, right? And there's only 10,000 of them. So you can bet that these will be worth something long term.
And have they already appreciated in value since when you acquired them?
Yeah, so this one, my profile picture, I in US dollars, I basically bought it for like 37 grand, and now it's worth about 550 grand, right? And so, this is over a period of a couple months or so, and I would really encourage people not to look at it from like, like you're trying to invest in these things, because these are, I think 99% of these things will go to zero. So the way I'm looking at these right now, and the way we're building out our NFT project, is a couple things, right? And I'm going to give you some examples. So those of you that know Gary Vee has an NFT project called VeeFriends. So that's VeeFriends.com. And he's got, 10,000 of these, and these are kind of, different characters that he drew out by hand. Okay. And what's unique about these is that he has a conference that's coming in March, and you need to have one of his NFTs to get in. So he's going to have a big conference at Viking Stadium in Minnesota. And so basically this tells you that, you're buying this NFT for community. You're buying it for kind of access. And also you're betting on Gary Vee in terms of developing these characters, developing the IP of these. And, if he becomes very, very popular, like Marvel or Disney popular, these NFTs will become worth a lot, right? So there's a lot of different ways to look at this. But the way I'm looking at it right now, in terms of how we're developing ours, is, we are developing, a very strong community. And we're planning to character develop these for the long term, because I want to have leveling up is all about personal growth, right? So I want to have perhaps storybooks in the future, or cartoons or whatever, right? But we're gonna take it slowly, and there's a lot that you can do in terms of community, and also utility tokens, utility access. Meaning, like, here's an example: if you buy one of Gary Vee's NFTs, like a very specific one, for 3 years. One time a year, you can go to a New York Knicks game with him and sit courtside, right? Like, that's pretty special. Or you can go to like a dinner with him with like other entrepreneurs. So there's a lot of things you can do here.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. And so what do you think if, so let's say I'm an investor off the street, or would you even frame it that way? Is it sort of like the way to think about, is the way to think about NFTs as an investor, or is it a novelty, or like, what is it? All of those things? How do you frame it up?
I think it's tougher for me. Like, one of my friends right now, he has like 25 of these, like the things in my profile, and so I think his portfolio is actually worth like $40 or $50 million right now. I think it's tough, in my opinion, because I'm largely a buy and hold type of guy, and so I just don't see it as an investment right now. To me, it's more of like a, more of an art type of thing, and more of me buying access, right? So all the NFTs, I think 80 to 90% of the NFTs I own right now give me access to, for example, next week when I'm in New York, there's a yacht party, okay? And only NFT holders can get into that yacht party. There's be like 1,000 people, so I guess it's a big boat. And then there's a warehouse party, and then there's a private charity dinner at Carbone next week in New York, right? And again, I cannot get in if I don't have the NFT. And so to me, getting special access and then meeting great people, like, I've always been, from a sales perspective, I've always been big on building relationships for the long term, and being able to get in on this at the ground floor level right now, and being able to build those relationships right now, that to me is worth a lot more than whatever I paid for these things.
Right. Interesting. So it's sort of like you view it as, there's an opportunity to gain access to a set of things that you don't currently have access to. And as a possible byproduct, these things will be worth more over time. But that's sort of gravy on top of, sort of almost like almost like a purchased experience versus like, I suppose in some sense, like art, you buy art, you experience art, but some people want to invest in art, but some people just like to look at art. So it seems like there's some parallels there.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I mean, it's when I think about paying for a TED conference ticket pre-COVID, right? So that would be like 15 grand a year. Paying for Singularity University, the executive program, 15 grand. These to me, or like any like YPO or EO, any of these groups, it's worth so much more than that because at the end of the day, people like doing business with people, and it's all about relationships. It's just a lot of the attention is going here. Like never in my life did I think I'd be able to interact with some of the top DJs in the world or like NFL wide receivers, but it's because I'm in this space right now. So I think there's something to be said about being at the ground floor of this stuff in the very beginning. So
yeah, it's super exciting. Well, maybe as a closing thought before we take questions from the audience, if there are any, maybe just as you reflect back upon your career and you reflect back upon the writing and all the podcasting that you've done, like if you were to distill, maybe one or two lessons or best practices to be good at sales and have that be a part of one of your power ups or one of the things that you're good at. What would be the one or two words of wisdom you have for folks that understand that this is important, but maybe need to work to get better at it?
yeah, I think this really applies to anything around building an audience or a business or building like a sales machine. It typically takes 2 to 3 years for whatever reason. I don't know if that's what you found, but I was talking about this with my podcast co-host Neil. So we've started a lot of different projects. We've started a lot of different businesses. We bought other businesses, but for whatever reason, to really get something going, it typically takes 2 to 3 years. But if you hit lightning in the bottle, good for you. But that's generally just the trend that I've seen. So just being kind of long-term patient, but short-term impatient, that's always worked out.
Yeah, that reminds me. There was an HBR article from years and years ago that interviewed Jeff Bezos. It's maybe 15 years old at this point, and one of the things that struck me about that article was he talked about this concept of at Amazon, it normally took 7 years for something to go from kind of an idea to something that was really big and impacted the company. Mm-hmm. And I think my experience at Wayfair was similar to that, where like and those are big sort of massive organizations, but yeah, I think patience is truly a virtue of these things, and being able to look at the small leading indicators and in building those up over time is super important. So that's great advice. Okay, so I'm going to pause the questions here and see if anybody has. So again, this is our first podcast. There's a question about whether I can even operate the thing properly. But if folks have questions, let me know, and I will try to identify that you have a question and bring you up on stage to ask it. Okay, well, if anybody has questions, I guess, email me. But Eric, before we go, let us know where can people find the book, and if people want to follow your work online or in other venues, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Eric OSIU or on Instagram, same username, Eric Siu. And you can just go to levelingup.com if you want to learn more about the book.
Great. Okay, well, hey, really appreciate you taking some time out to cover a number of fascinating topics, and enjoy the yacht party. I'm sorry I will not be joining you there, as I am now going to go scramble to very quickly try to figure out what NFTs are all about. But I hope you have a great time there, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, you did great. This is great, Joel, and thanks everyone for joining.
Okay, thanks.